I got to remind everybody, 1% of the wealthy, the top 1%, pay 48% of the taxes for New York.
And how many of them will leave if he's elected?
At least 90%.
People like John Katz leave and his other friends in business leave. New York will lose its tax base. The city will undoubtedly go bankrupt the same way it did in the late 1970s. And frankly, I don't think Donald Trump is going to bail it out.
IRS migration data arrived in January 2026, and suddenly, the numbers on Governor Kathy Hochul's desk were impossible to ignore. For years, officials suspected businesses were quietly relocating, but the full scale of it hadn't been clearly measured. Now the new data finally painted the full picture, and it raised serious concern inside state leadership. Between 2020 and 2024, a total of 892 companies that once had headquarters in New York officially relocated to other states. The largest share moved to Florida, with 341 companies choosing that destination. Texas followed with 187 relocations, while 129 companies established new headquarters in North Carolina. These weren't small shifts either. They represented major financial activity moving across state lines. The IRS tracked the adjusted gross income connected to those business relocations, and the totals were eye-opening. Roughly $47 billion in business-related income shifted away from New York over just 4 years. When that income was based in New York, it supported tax revenue and economic activity across the state. Once those businesses relocated, that revenue began benefiting other regions instead. After the report became public, Hochul's messaging noticeably changed. She had previously said affordability pressures were pushing businesses and residents to reconsider staying in the state, and that additional tax increases could intensify the trend. The IRS data now gave officials something they hadn't fully had before: concrete numbers showing how much economic activity had already moved elsewhere. She later told lawmakers that the relocation trend was real, measurable, and continuing to grow. State economists had long suspected a pattern, but until these federal migration reports were released, the full scale was difficult to confirm. Now, every relocation was documented, and every dollar of reported income was tracked. The numbers also revealed that the movement wasn't random. It followed two clear migration patterns. The first pattern involved the financial services industry. Between 2019 and 2023, 158 asset management firms overseeing nearly $993 billion in assets relocated their headquarters away from New York. Bloomberg reviewed the filings, and the movement was hard to miss. Out of those firms, 56 selected Florida as their new home base. These were not small satellite offices or simple regional expansions. These were full headquarters relocations, meaning the firm's official address, leadership decisions, and tax responsibilities all shifted to another state. A second pattern appeared across a wide range of industries. Technology companies, media firms, consulting groups, manufacturers, and retail brands were all part of the same broader shift. The movement was not limited to one sector. It stretched across the entire business landscape, showing that the trend was economy-wide rather than industry-specific. New York City's tax system relies heavily on its highest earners. The wealthiest 1% of residents contribute roughly 40% of the city's income tax revenue. When high-earning executives and business owners relocate, that financial base becomes smaller. Between 2022 and 2024, personal income tax revenue declined from $16.7 billion to $14 billion, creating a gap of about $2.7 billion. City budget officials then faced difficult financial planning decisions. Some infrastructure upgrades were postponed, certain public programs were scaled back, and hiring across departments slowed. In many cases, the economic activity connected to those businesses was now supporting services in other states instead. Among the destinations, Florida stood out as the most common choice. One major reason often mentioned in public discussions is its zero state income tax, written directly into the state constitution. By comparison, New York City's combined top tax rate can reach 14.776% for someone earning around $5 million annually. Relocating to Florida can create major financial savings for high-earning executives. For example, an executive earning around $5 million a year could keep roughly $738,800 more annually compared to remaining in New York. Over a decade, that difference grows to nearly $7.4 million in potential tax savings. When entire leadership teams relocate together, the numbers expand quickly. If a firm moves 10 executives at that income level, the potential savings could reach about $7.38 million each year, or nearly $73.8 million over 10 years. These are not theoretical numbers used in casual debate. They reflect the real financial comparisons that companies and executives often review while considering where to base their operations. For many firms, those calculations become a major factor in long-term planning. Several large financial firms began exploring Florida years earlier. Elliott Management, which oversees about $41 billion in assets, relocated its headquarters from Manhattan to West Palm Beach in October 2020. Around the same time, Point72, managing roughly $20 billion, expanded its presence in Florida in January 2021. Moves like these caught the attention of other firms across the industry. When major players showed they could operate effectively from Florida, the perceived risk of relocating started to fade. By 2024, Palm Beach County had grown into one of the country's largest financial centers, ranking behind only New York and Chicago in certain wealth management categories. As more firms established offices there, the region developed a powerful network effect. Talent pools expanded, specialized service providers opened nearby, and the entire ecosystem around financial services began to grow. Corporate headquarters activity soon followed this momentum. In January 2026, Wells Fargo announced plans to base its wealth and investment management division in West Palm Beach. That division generates roughly $16 billion in annual revenue, accounting for about 20% of the bank's total business activity. According to the division's chief executive officer, the decision was driven by changing client locations. As more clients established residences in southern states, wealth managers began positioning themselves closer to where those clients now spend much of their time. From a business standpoint, the adjustment allowed firms to maintain direct relationships and provide services in the same regions where many clients are now based. New York's 2025 mayoral election appeared to speed up an already developing trend. According to business relocation attorney Chad Cummings, the day after the election results were announced, his office experienced a dramatic surge in inquiries. Cummings had spent years helping companies relocate headquarters, but he explained that he had never seen demand spike at that level before. Call volume reportedly increased 5 to 10 times above normal levels, signaling that many companies were suddenly ready to move forward with decisions they had been considering for some time. Within just 2 weeks, the activity became visible in official filings. 27 New York companies submitted paperwork to expand operations in Florida, while 9 firms filed documents indicating full headquarters relocations. The mayor of Boca Raton later confirmed that 4 corporate headquarters were planning moves to that city alone. For many businesses, the election outcome appeared to act as the final signal that pushed long-discussed plans into action. Federal migration data also highlighted a broader shift at the individual level. Between 2018 and 2022, about 125,000 New York residents relocated to Florida, bringing an estimated $14 billion in adjusted gross income with them. Roughly $10 billion of that income settled in 3 South Florida counties: Miami-Dade, Palm Beach, and Broward. Each relocation affects the overall tax structure. When high-earning residents move, their contributions to the local tax system move with them. However, many city expenses remain constant. Infrastructure maintenance, public services, and long-term financial obligations continue regardless of population changes. As a result, shifts in where income is reported can gradually reshape how the remaining tax base is distributed across residents. Governor Kathy Hochul responded carefully when proposals surfaced about raising taxes further in New York City. At one point, the city's mayor suggested increasing the top local income tax rate by 2 percentage points, potentially bringing it to about 16.776%. Hochul publicly pushed back on the idea, saying that encouraging more high earners to relocate would not benefit the state's long-term economy. Her comments reflected the migration data showing that some businesses and residents had already been relocating over several years. State economists examined different financial scenarios. On paper, higher tax rates could increase revenue from those who remain in the city. However, analysts also noted a possible risk. If enough high earners decided to relocate, the overall tax base could shrink rather than grow. Several economic models explored this possibility, and many showed that migration patterns could influence the final outcome in ways that are difficult to predict. At the same time, not everyone agrees that relocation trends are permanent or driven mainly by taxes. Research from Cornell University found that wealthy residents historically relocate at a relatively low rate, about 2.4% per year, compared with 4.5% among lower-income households. Economist Christobal Young also examined states that increased taxes on high earners and reported little evidence of large migration spikes following those changes. Recent housing data adds another layer to the discussion. Luxury home sales in Manhattan increased by roughly 25% between October and November 2025, and more than 33,000 residents with wealth estimated above $30 million continue to live in New York City. These figures suggest a more complicated picture. Some high-income individuals relocate, while others remain or newly arrive. New York has long experienced a cycle where established wealth leaves while new entrepreneurs, investors, and professionals move in, constantly reshaping the city's economic landscape. New wealth is constantly being created in major financial centers. Initial public offerings can suddenly turn founders and early employees into millionaires. Startup companies get acquired, finance bonuses reach record levels, and technology firms go public every year. Each of these events can generate new high-income residents who contribute to the local economy. The key question economists ask is simple. Do new arrivals outnumber the people who relocate elsewhere? If a city consistently creates more millionaires than it loses, the overall tax base can still grow. However, long-term data suggests the balance may be shifting. In 2010, New York was home to about 12.7% of all millionaires in the United States. By 2022, that share had declined to roughly 8.7%, representing a noticeable drop over time. Analysts estimate that if New York had maintained its earlier share, the state could potentially see about $13 billion more in annual tax revenue. That difference represents funding that might otherwise support public projects and city services. When revenue growth slows, governments often have to delay or prioritize certain investments. Infrastructure upgrades, transit improvements, and public facility modernization can take longer to complete when budgets tighten. These types of financial trade-offs become part of the broader economic discussion. Meanwhile, some observers point to structural factors in other states that attract businesses and investors. Florida, for example, has a zero state income tax written into its constitution, which makes the policy difficult to change without a statewide vote. The state also ranks among the lowest in certain regulatory measures, allowing companies to operate with relatively lighter administrative requirements. Combined with strong economic growth in several metropolitan areas, these conditions have helped draw capital, companies, and financial professionals to the region. Supporters of Florida's growth often describe these advantages as long-term features of the state's economic model. Policies such as the absence of a state income tax and a business-friendly regulatory environment are built into the system, which many analysts believe makes them relatively stable over time. Federal migration data helps show how relocation trends appear in real financial terms. Instead of just headlines about luxury real estate purchases in coastal cities like Palm Beach, the numbers often show up in government budgets and revenue reports. When high-earning residents relocate, their tax contributions shift with them, and local governments must adjust to that change. The financial equation itself is fairly straightforward. If revenue decreases while expenses remain largely the same, officials usually face two choices: increase taxes, reduce spending, or adjust a mix of both. In many discussions about New York's economy, the bigger question is not simply where wealthy residents decide to live, but how cities maintain funding for services while economic patterns evolve.